Episode 7, 2006. We cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down, in honor or dishonor to the latest generation.
Now, on Inside the Buffalo...
Wait! Can't use that title. How about this? All right.
It's time once again for Down and Drought, your weekly walk down memory lane with the Buffalo Bills and their 17-year playoff absence. The year is 2006. I'm Prescott Rossi, alongside me, Thad Brown, and back after a week off, Mr. Dave Yates. And fellas, we start right at the top of 2006, January 4th. Tom Donahoe fired as president and general manager of the Buffalo Bills.
If there are any bullets to be fired, I want you to fire them at me.
After a really bad 2005 season, obviously this was the move to make.
Yeah, this was coming for a while too. And the thing to remember with Tom Donahoe, it wasn't just about the team on the field or the coaching staff. It was up and down the organization. This move did not work.
I want to apologize to the fans of Buffalo.
He was a micromanager. I mean, the stories that came out about secretaries and chefs and, different underlings, people you would never think of, having a connection to the GM of the football team, who just were rubbed the wrong way by Tom Donahoe.
And would whisper things to the media, too.
Well,
you heard about this.
It became louder than a whisper the closer you got to the end of 2005. So it was long overdue.
We need a fresh start.
And the thing of it is, too, I mean, you think about when they hired him, it seemed like the perfect guy at the perfect time. It just seemed like it should have worked. Everything was there, but it just was not meant to be.
And Ralph Wilson, at 86 years old, takes back the president title.
I am going to be the president, and I am going to be much more active than I have been in the last 5 years.
It wasn't something that we've talked about in this, the last few weeks about Ralph getting older and getting less, with it, for lack of a better term. When this happened, because things had gone so bad with Tom Donahoe, at least for the moment when Ralph said, I'm going to take back power, you felt like, okay, he's the owner, he has the right to do this. Anybody is going to be better than Tom Donahoe for the short term, so it makes sense for him to say, you know what, this is my time, this is my team, I'm going to take control back.
It provided a little stability, which I think the turmoil they were going through at that time, they needed something, that's for sure.
He suggests, the doctor did, that I take 20 milligrams of Prozac every day. And I'm up to 100 milligrams of Prozac.
Ralph has two pressers on that day to then reiterate that Mike Malarkey is safe.
I want to shake Mike's hand here.
Now, okay, the Bills are in the market for a new GM. That was kind of expected, especially in the tail end of 2005. So the very next day, or in the lead up to the next day, the reports start coming out that Marv Levy is going to come on as a consultant with Ralph. And we've talked about in prior episodes that Ralph maybe didn't have that guy that he felt as a peer that he could talk to and discuss moves, whether they be in the front office or with the roster itself. Well, Marv Levy's 80 years old while Ralph's 86. So, okay, here comes a guy to be a good consultant. Well, the next day, he's named general manager.
The new vice president of football operations for the Buffalo Bills, Marv Levy.
It was weird, obviously, but you didn't, dismiss it out of hand because Marv Levy was so smart and so respected. Yeah. I mean, people got to understand, I think most Bills fans know that Marv Levy, outside of just being a good football coach, is incredibly smart, even now, as old as he is. And then you thought, well, okay, he didn't really have the scouting background, but he knows everything about everything. Okay, we'll give this a run. Now, the press conferences, I don't know which one. I know I did a couple of them.
Don't think I was there for
I might have done them all. The juxtaposition of Ralph and Marv Levy at 100 million years combined.
166, the two of them
whatever
combined.
It was.
Yeah. I'm old enough to know my limitations, and I'm young enough to exceed them.
Being up there as now the brain trust of the football team, and both guys kind of laughing about it, and they dubbed themselves the Golden Boys.
You can nickname us in the football world, the pro football world, the two Golden Boys.
Bill staffers in the room thought it was funny. The rest of us in the media were like, okay, this is what we're doing. It just, from a football point of view, it didn't make any much sense, but because it was Marv Levy, everybody kind of gave it a shot.
That's the thing. It was Marv. I mean, and so you're trying to harken back to your glory days and maybe recapture some of that. And Marv there was no reason to think he couldn't do it, really. I mean, the guy, like you said, he was brilliant. The guy knew his stuff.
People say, I thought you were retired. I am retired. And now that I got those new tires, I'm ready to roll. Okay.
Maybe you could catch some magic right
You
there.
talk about going back to the glory days. Tom Donahoe was a diversion from that because you had the Bill Polian tree that kind of went into the Butler tree, and it had been the group that had done the 4 Super Bowls. Tom Donahoe was a total outsider. Yeah,
exactly.
And now we're going back to something that was good in Buffalo.
Marv Levy says he doesn't know Mike Malarkey, but likes his personality and wants to get him to know him better. Well, 8 days later, Friday, January 13th, Mike Malarkey calls a press conference. He has resigned as head coach. Just stunner to end all stunners?
That was more of a stunner. As crazy as Marv Levy was, I think Malarkey was more so by a lot.
Big time. I think it's funny. He likes Mike Malarkey's personality. I didn't really think he had much of one.
That's what he said. That's what he said. I don't.
I mean, Mike Malarkey had 2 seasons. One that was surprisingly good. The other one that wasn't so good, but there was already a scapegoat. It was Tom Donahoe. Malarkey could have kept that job if he wanted. Exactly.
For sure.
And people still thought of him as an up and coming, a head coach / offensive mind with promise. It was his job to lose, and the fact that he just decided I didn't want it. Now there was talk about at the time. Remember, people thought that his family had taken too much garbage off the field from fans.
That's what
and
he
stuff.
cited. He cited family and personal reasons.
And I think that had been rumored before he said it. And then later on, it was kind of talked about as a football decision. He just didn't like Marv Levy running the show, which you can understand too. Either way, that was the shock of the offseason.
Yeah, ESPN's Len Pasquarelli reporting that Malarkey didn't like the setup for assistants and for free agency that the team wanted going, which is Marv Levy.
Almost 10 years later, Doug Marrone does just about the same thing.
Exactly. It's kind of amazing. That's one theme that I've picked up on from doing this is like, man, we're really just going in circles. We're really going in circles with this team. Well,
before you talk about going in circles, I watched we're going to get into the coach here, but the Levy regime, especially that year, was a lot about character.
Ability without character will lose. The Buffalo Bills are going to be a team of high character.
Where are we hearing that now?
I know, right?
From Sean McDermott. I mean, it's just cycling through again.
And even Greg Williams quotes from when he was hired. It's like, man, this sounds, if you were to take away said by Greg Williams, you would have thought it was Sean McDermott. Yeah. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe 2017 is different.
At some point it's going to work.
But it was not a good sign to see. A little note just kind of tucked away while the Bills are looking for a new head coach. On Thursday, January 19th, the Bills signed 12 free agents off the street. One of them is Fred Jackson. And I know we'll spend a lot of time talking about him, but that's the first time I see the name Fred Jackson and the Buffalo Bills together. And then they'll be having basically the next decade together.
The thing with me with Fred Jackson is I don't ever remember covering him as like the unknown third running back. It was like all of a sudden he was a guy that was important. And
this still takes time. He still has to go to Europe and
all that stuff. Yeah. But like it was always, I've always looked back and thought, where did Fred Jackson come from? Why were they never remembering him as, there's always in training camp the standout 8th receiver and 5th running back that does something at Fisher. Like, I remember that guy.
They're the bubble guy.
Exactly.
They're like, he had a great training camp. He's going to make it. And he makes it, and you forget about him on the bench. And
Fred Jackson the other way. You never realize it. All of a sudden he's a starter.
He's like a stealth running back.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you think Marv Levy is the new GM. One of his first decisions is to sign Fred Jackson, the 2 college graduates. How about that? So Monday, January 3rd, the Bills find their head coach, and it's Dick Jauron. We've said this with Malarkey. We probably felt the same way about Greg Williams. Like, really? That's the guy? Was that kind of the feeling? I mean, it's easy to say that in 2017. Was that the feeling in January of 06?
I remember the first thing we all did was start adding how many years old the owner,
exactly. Yeah, right.
That was the joke
that was the
right
big
away.
Thing. Yep.
But yeah, Dick Jauron did nothing for anyone. He
Not at all.
He was a recycled retread. I don't think people were. I think people then were more excited about Marv Levy and the idea of maybe he can figure it out. And Dick Jauron was just his choice. Okay, it's Marv's choice, so we'll give it a shot.
And it was that whole, I said it before, it started that whole cycle when all this started of let's just take a chance on basically a coordinator and see if we can catch somebody who's going to be a great head coach. And just instead of just trying to get someone who'd already proven themselves, really.
Well, New Orleans at this time, they hire Sean Payton. They were also in the market for a new head coach. The Bills were never linked with Sean Payton. The guys they were linked with, and you talk about retreads, Mike Sherman, Dom Capers, Jim Caldwell, and then Bobby April and James Lofton, which kind of come out of left field. There's no one in that group that makes you go like, oh man, the Bills, they should have hired that guy. There's no one in that list. And I mean, we've talked about Ralph and the way he spends money on coaches and staff at the same time in 06? Are you feeling like, none of these guys are inspiring at all for this team's future?
I think that's a big reason why you looked at that hire as, well, it's Marv Levy's idea, so maybe it'll work.
The only thing that I'll promise is I'll promise to do everything I can do to fulfill my part of this obligation to bring a winning team back to Buffalo.
And that's really the only consideration of it. Dick Jauron, he had some good years with the Bears, so there was some.
They had a 13-3 year.
Right, exactly. So there was reason to be encouraged, but it was still. Marv Levy was the bellwether opinion maker of this Bills regime, whether you were positive or negative. Dick Jauron was just the guy he chose.
2 days after that, after they hired Dick Jauron, the Bills named a new executive vice president of business operations. It is East Syracuse native and St. John Fisher, Russ Brandon. So the first time we're mentioning Russ Brandon in Down and Drought. Fellas, I mean, maybe you didn't know him at the time, but early thoughts on Russ Brandon.
Well, we knew him as a Rochester guy. He was a guy that you'd recognize and talk to in camp. This wasn't.
He was the vice president of marketing and directing.
But there was
development. Excuse me.
Of the various Bills executives, especially the 2000 era, especially for a Rochester TV station. I think all of us who worked in this market knew of Russ Brandon and had a relationship with him, and knew of the success that he had built with the first near decade with the Bills. So this was not a surprise. This was kind of a local boy does good, we're all rooting for you, good job kind of thing. Little did we know how much he would factor into the football side. But at that point it was great, good for Rochester, good for a Rochester college graduate as a Fisher guy.
We're going to get into free agency, and right as free agency starts, February 23rd, the Bills release Mike Williams, officially bust. Then on March 1st, Sam Adams, Mark Campbell, and Lawyer Malloy released as well. Just feelings about that quad group of four that Sam Adams had his moments, Lawyer Malloy had his moments, Mike Williams didn't really have his moments.
He had his moments. They were just bad.
Yeah, his moments are watching guys fly by him as Drew Bledsoe's laid out.
Great bullfighter, ole.
It was not good. That was just trim and fat.
Yeah, literally.
I don't. Yeah, a couple cases.
He's a big dude.
Yeah, there wasn't. I don't remember anyone shedding a tear. From
no, it was a case of it was going to happen sooner or later.
Well, were there tears shed for Eric Moulds? Because on March 14th, Moulds traded to traded to Houston for a 5th-round pick, and Moulds, who had been there for 10 years, basically 900 yards a season, a bunch of Pro Bowls, didn't have the Super Bowl ties, but had the 90s and playoff runs. Final thoughts on Eric Moulds as he now leaves the Bills.
He had gotten tired of it.
You could tell by the end. Yeah.
He was a guy that had half a career with the Bills when they were good, not Super Bowl good, but playoff good. Yep. And then he had spent a half a career with the first part of the drought. And we've seen, tons of good players cycle through that have just gotten tired. I mean, now it's Eric Wood and Kyle Williams.
Yeah.
That you can tell just when you go up to them, they were tired of the environment. And Moulds was one of those guys. It got contentious, and he had to go for everybody's betterment.
Absolutely loved Eric Moulds. One of my favorite guys to cover, I think. And he was one of those guys, like in training camp during, when they were warming up and stuff like that, just to watch the things that he could do. It made you really appreciate how fantastic he was. And I don't think because he was here for so long, never really got the recognition he deserved as a premier receiver.
I agree. I think Eric Moulds in New York or Dallas or New England would have been recognized, maybe not as a Hall of Famer, but one level below.
All of very good. And it's something that you go into the Ralph New Era Field, and you look up at the wall, and his name's not there. And for the longest time, Lou Saban was like, that's the name that needs to be on the Wall of Fame. Lou's on there now. Is Eric Moulds that guy? I think he belongs there, and I think he probably has the strongest argument of anyone. I don't think anybody has memorized all the names on the wall, but you look up there and you don't see Eric Moulds, and that one stands out for me.
I think you make a good case for him. I'd have to go back through and review numbers and all that stuff, but the other part of it is that we've had so many drought years. There just aren't the heroes.
Yeah.
Because to be a hero, you've got to win something, and the Bills haven't done much winning of anything. But if you want to talk about drought era Wall of Fame candidates, well, let's see. Let's just throw names out here. Moulds.
Evans.
I don't think Evans is on that list.
I don't think so.
Schobel.
Probably on the list. I don't think he makes it. I would go, is Brian Moorman not out of the question? I don't know.
Brian Moorman, I think, would be up there.
I would put a punter on there, and then Fred Jackson's obviously going to be a candidate too. But Moulds is on the short list of that right now.
I can see that. Yeah.
From if you're just talking drought era guys, Reuben Brown would be one of those.
Yeah.
But I think if now that we're going through the names, I think Moulds would be number one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have a hard
Was a
time.
guy like Fletcher here long enough?
No.
No?
No. Because I put Spikes in front of Fletcher anyway. And neither one of those guys probably were here long enough. Antoine Winfield would probably go in front of both those guys defensively.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's 10 years with the Bills, 3 trips to the Pro Bowl, 675 catches, 9,100 yards. So 910 yards
a year
for 10 seasons.
With the J.P. Lossmans
Exactly.
and Kelly Holcomb of the world throwing him the ball. Yeah.
So right in the midst of free agency, the NFL votes on a new collective bargaining agreement. And I know it was over 10 years ago, so it might be kind of lost to the sands of time. But Ralph and the Cincinnati Bengals, they are the only 2 teams to vote no on the new CBA, and Ralph is convinced that the new CBA will harm small market teams. And we've talked about in recent episodes about the cloud looming over Western New York, and with the Buffalo Bills, relocation is always kind of there in the background. To hear and see Ralph be so adamant that the direction the league is going in is bad for the Bills, did that take you back at all to be like, oh man, Ralph, if Ralph really doesn't like it, maybe this really isn't good for the future of this team?
No, the immediate reaction was,
really?
30 owners liked it. Ralph was one of the 2, and Ralph was kind of as it is. So I think we all looked at it as Ralph just being a cantankerous old man. But it wasn't too much longer later, because the NFL had the short work stoppage that lasted in the training camp of 2011. At the end of the day, Ralph was proven correct. That CBA was not a workable agreement. And even though he was one of 2 owners that went against it, and at the time was looked at as a maverick at best, and just
an 86-year-old maverick,
a crazy wild-eyed 86-year-old at worst, he was proven right, years later, that agreement did not work and had to be redone, and almost cost the NFL real live games not too long after.
Sometimes I'm surprised the Bills are still here.
Yeah.
Just because the way things play out, sometimes you can see where the writing's on the wall that, you know what?
And we've seen other teams move, especially even just in the last 24 months.
Yeah.
And you just go like, the Rams are gone, the Chargers are gone, Oakland's going to be on the move again, and the Bills are staying in Western New York this entire time. Ralph also adamant at this period that the team's not for sale. That even though he doesn't like the direction the league's going in, the Bills are still Ralph Wilson's team. Monday, April 10th, an old friend returns, Peerless Price. We're surprised to see Price coming back with Moulds gone. They had re-signed Josh Reed as well, but the thought that we're bringing Price back after a few years away where he went to Atlanta and Dallas.
It wasn't much of a move, It wasn't.
He didn't work out. It did work out well for him out there.
Yeah, no, and Peerless Price had success in Buffalo, and bringing him back, you can see the logic there, but it wasn't anything where, wow, Peerless Price is back. I think, like we've talked about in prior episodes, he was a pain in the neck to deal with in the locker room. So we were like, oh, great. Yeah, here we go.
NFL Draft for 2006, Saturday, April 29th. The Bills have the 8th overall pick. In the lead-up to the draft, they are linked heavily with Haloti Ngata, the defensive tackle, but they end up taking Dante Whitner. Surprised reactions to that pick.
As that pick grew close, I remember in the room, we were talking about Matt Leinart, to be honest.
And he was out there too,
And the Haloti Ngata stuff, I don't remember much. And not that I'm not saying it's not true. I'm sure the research is impeccable. But, as we got closer in the room, Leinart was the talk.
And Leinart was there. Leinart was available at 8, as was Ngata.
Right. So either way, though, Dante Whitner was surprised. That was one of the 3 or 4 audible gasps in the media room when the Bills made their pick. And this is 2006, so this isn't like now where you find it on Twitter 5 minutes before the pick happens. This was waiting, to see what
Here comes
the commissioner,
what
the commissioner says. And he says Dante Whitner. It was one of those squint your eye and really? Yeah, exactly. And he had gone right after Michael Huff, so the immediate conversation then was, did the Bills want Huff? Would they have taken Huff? As it turned out, neither one of the 2 guys were anything great.
No,
but it was a surprise pick and definitely a very questionable one.
Well, the Bills, you mentioned the audible gasps. That wasn't the only one in that first round in 2006, because a little bit later they trade their 2nd and 3rd round picks to Chicago to jump back into the first round, and with the 26th overall pick, they take John McCargo. It's not as bad as Lossman. That one is the hallmark for bad draft day trades, but what was the feeling to, wait a minute, John McCargo, a guy projected to go in the 3rd or 4th round in 06?
See, you say that, and I would argue that while Lossman was the more destructive trade, because you commit to a quarterback, it puts your franchise back years and years. John McCargo was the dumbest move they made during the drought, because no one thought he was worthy of that pick.
Yeah.
The Bills didn't really, have a dying need there.
Yeah.
And he wasn't looked at as a guy that was going to change, at least with a quarterback. No one liked J.P. Lossman, but if the Bills were right, completely changes the franchise. no matter if John McCargo had been the second coming of Fred Smerlis, the Bills still would have been missing playoffs.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so just sheer intelligence of trades. I will say that is the dumbest Drought move the Bills have done all 17 years.
That's saying something too.
Yeah,
That's a hot take. That's a hot take right there. That McCargo's the worst one.
Yeah.
Dave, just your feelings on those first 2 picks in the first round in 2006.
I just remember thinking, Dante was a good guy to deal with and stuff, but it was to go that high was like, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it just seemed
they
bizarro.
reached badly on both those
Yeah,
picks.
they really did. And I don't know if it was them trying to,
Marv?
Marv
Yeah.
trying to prove that he still had it and they had that magic touch and kind of just find the diamond in the roughs thing or what.
Their final pick from the first day is Ashton Yabodi in the 3rd round. The 4th round, they take Co Simpson. Then in the 5th round, a defensive tackle out of LSU, Mr. Kyle Williams. And we'll talk about Kyle's impact in training camp in a moment, but just did you know anything about Kyle Williams? And I'm sure you didn't think this is a guy we'd be talking about over a decade later.
Well, the funny thing about Kyle Williams, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a time in the locker room, you and I were just hanging out, in between interviews, and Kyle was just standing there, and we started talking NASCAR with him.
Yeah.
And he was a LSU guy,
Yep.
and had been familiar was a big NASCAR fan, and we talked to him for 15 minutes when he was an unknown 5th round pick. Loved him. I mean, had a great conversation. He couldn't get enough. We're talking about drivers and everything else, and and I always remember that conversation and what he has become since, because he has never changed his personality.
Right.
He's become more cynical because of all the losing he had to deal with, but. He has always been a straight shooter, a guy you can really approach and talk to, and a guy who is not afraid to speak his mind. Then, it was lug nuts and drive shafts. Now it's, defensive tackles and terrible quarterbacks.
So the Bills end the draft with a very good pick and some questionable picks. But at the same time that this is all going on, in the spring of 2006, the Buffalo Sabres go to Game 7 of the conference finals in the first year after the NHL lockout. Was there ever any a feeling, especially at this time, the Bills coming off a 5-11 season, while the Sabres are making this incredible playoff run, that the Sabres were the talk of Western New York over the Bills?
I think at the time,
Just seasonally, I think so.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I think once hockey ends and football kicks back up, Buffalo is always going to be a Bills town first. That's the way it's going to be. No matter the Sabres, they get that bandwagon enthusiasm behind them, but I think once football comes around, the Bills are still top dog.
Was that the second Sabres run?
First one.
First one, okay. The example to draw from this is that the next year, when the Sabres, wasn't that the year they started 10-0 or 11-0, whatever it was? Or was it the second year or the first year? Yeah. Regardless, the next year, even with a not so good Bills
The second year
team,
they win the President's Trophy. The first year they finished 4th.
Right, okay.
In the East.
Regardless,
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
2 years, the second year, it was still a Bills town up until the middle of January. People were in the Sabres, but and not living there. I won't want to go on record and say I know this for sure, but the Bills are still number one there. I remember we talked to one of the Buffalo photographers, a guy named Scott Swenson, works at WWB, and this was a couple years later. But I threw the question at him. I said, would Buffalo prefer, percentage of Buffalonians who would prefer to win a Super Bowl or a Stanley Cup? What would be the number? He said 95-5 Super Bowl. So, and that's even with the Sabres having some level of success much higher than the Bills ever had.
Going into training camp, the storylines that come out of that, Lossman beats out Kelly Holcomb. So even with a new head coach, shocker, JP Lossman is the guy. Kyle Williams starts over John McCargo in preseason games. So they're not even through training camp, and Kyle Williams is outplaying John McCargo, their first-round pick. And Fred Jackson is impressive in camp. He's one of those guys that you see in camp and go oh, this guy, he might be a guy to kind of keep your eye on for later in the season. The Bills put him on the practice squad. Any thoughts from that 06 camp, especially seeing Kyle Williams with that motor, though he may be undersized, coming out and outperforming a guy who they traded for to then take in the first round?
He was still a fifth-round pick.
Yeah.
You liked him, but he was still a fifth-round pick. So you look at that draft status and think, what does this mean? The Bills were 5-11. They were now in the throes of a 6-year drought. There was not much optimism. There wasn't excitement. There was, okay, let's see what kind of hand we get dealt with this new coach and Marv Levy.
Going into the start of this season, the NFL, first off, gets a new commissioner on September 1st. Roger Goodell, a Western New York boy, becomes commissioner of the NFL. But they also institute a new media policy with pool shooting. And why don't you guys explain exactly how that works and how you guys handled that in 2006 with so many different stations and different equipment?
So what happened is every local station who covers a pro football game was able to put a cameraman on the sideline, or in some cases two. Dave and I shot a lot of games together in those early 2000s years. What the NFL decided was that season, in their argument to unclutter the sideline, they said all the local TV stations could only use one photographer collectively. In the Bills' case, not only did that mean just for Rochester, that meant Rochester and Buffalo. So the ABC, CBS, NBC affiliate in Rochester, the 3 affiliates in Buffalo, collectively could only put one photographer on the sideline to, get video. And from our point of view, that low angle video, that's our unique look to the game. Because people watch the TV version, you see that everybody gets the TV highlights. It looks exactly the same. But the angles that we get, the abilities that we have as a photographer, the knowledge and experience you have to be in the right position, that makes every station's video unique. And not only that, it provides an opportunity and a window into other places, other parts of the game that the network doesn't bring. Sideline reactions, on the field, discussions. Reuben Brown saying he's going to leave the Bills on the field, after the Dolphins game, a couple years earlier. So we were, to put it mildly, unhappy about that move.
I mean, you feel handcuffed as a professional because you're doing nothing wrong really, and all of a sudden you feel like you're being punished, and it's taking away part of your repertoire as a professional to be able to do that. And you're like in Tampa when Sam Coward hurt his Achilles, and I had the shot of his foot under the bench because they're looking. The network didn't have that shot, but I think it helped too when we'd show up for media days or whatever. The guys would see you. There'd be that recognition. There was a little familiarity there, and I think that kind of helped. You didn't feel as an us versus them thing as that, and then all of a sudden, you're not there anymore. It's kind of weird.
The context you have on the sideline, especially with the Bills, because you're there every Wednesday for an entire season, and in our cases for several seasons, you know what to look for.
Right.
And all three of us, we've shot things that have been major moments. Whether the viral is a relatively new term, but video that became a big thing. And that happens partly because you're talented enough to know to look for it, but you also know the context of, this guy makes a big play, and why is that particularly important to this guy? A guy gets hurt. Something that happened to me in 2016. The Bills have the first female coach in league history. She's coming onto the field in Seattle, gets heckled by a Seahawks fan. I happen to have video of that. ESPN, a Monday Night Football game, when ESPN has 1 million cameras, they don't have that shot.
Right.
But I knew to get that shot, and I think for us on the sideline, whether it's our station and the other stations too, because they all have talented photographers as well. They have that understanding of the Bills, and that becomes such a valuable resource that you can't get when you only have one person there, or if you eliminate all of them and just have network TV cameras.
And to go all the way back to the other end of the drought, Dave was there at the Music City Miracle and was smart enough to know that even after the Bills had kicked the field goal to go ahead, and the thinking is the kickoff won't matter, the Bills are going to win, I want to be on the sideline. Dave makes sure to go to the end zone, and sure enough, doesn't the touchdown, it gets scored on the other side of the field, but the Titans come over and celebrate right in front of Dave, and was it Dyson? Right.
Yeah.
When he celebrates, our angle, Dave is literally as close as I am to him on Dyson celebrating, and to be able to see inside the helmet and see the face, you didn't get that angle on the network. It's something that only the local TV, angle can provide. And I remember reading a story about, it became a thing not just for Western New York. Every NFL market had a problem with it. The Indianapolis market, I remember talked about, there was a moment with Tony Dungy after an emotional week, how he got a hug from an assistant coach on the sideline after a game that no one captured because there weren't video cameras there. There were still guys who talked about seeing it, but no one was able to record it. So what the NFL ended up doing, just to complete the process at least, one photographer from each market, and we would have to feed all of our video to each other that night. And some nights, especially for night games, it became a pain in the neck. You didn't always have the video, in time. So it was something that we complained about and were unhappy about the whole season long, but that's how you dealt with it that year.
What kind of pressure also does that put on you when you're the one guy and you have 6, 7 stations that are relying on your video, and now you better not screw this one up?
Because I did the game in New England.
You're the season opener.
I had the season opener in New England, first test run of it, and you always put pressure on yourself just because you want to do the best for yourself, and you want it when I call back and Thad's like, did you get I got it, I was all over it, I nailed it, whatever, and then all of a sudden you realize, geez, I'm putting this up on the satellite for everybody else to see, and if I don't pull my weight this week, I don't want to look like crap. And we had a reputation as being guys that could do the job pretty well. So we knew that we had to live up to that reputation. And so And first night, feeding it back, everything was going great. I remember sitting in a restaurant having dinner at about 10 o'clock at night, and I get a phone call. I don't see anything. There's nothing here. I'm like, dude, I sent it. One of the stations in Buffalo couldn't get the feed for some reason on their satellite, and they were flipping out. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what there was nothing.
We've never done this before.
Yeah. Because it wasn't only because if I'm not mistaken, it was post as well. Like we were.
No, we could do interviews.
Did we do the interviews?
It was just game footage. Yeah,
Okay.
you could be in the locker room still. But that was still enough. Everybody wanted it, because you didn't want to. When you're covering the Bills, you don't want to have to run the network broadcast over and over. Not to mention, legally, there's a limit on how much broadcast video you can show in a news program. So it was something we all needed and had to figure out as it went along. You ended up doing most of our station games. I think I did one Jets game, and I remember going. It was late in the year, so we were kind of used to it. My feeling was not so much nervousness, but I want to show these. Look at me. Look at my skills. That kind of thing. So. But it was pressure for sure.
Week 1 of the NFL season, you mentioned it, in New England, September 10th. The first play of the season. Tom Brady dropped by Takeo Spikes, who makes his triumphant return after blowing his Achilles in 2005. London Fletcher returns it for a touchdown. You think, could we have 31-0, 2.0 this time in New England? A Bills win, but it's the Bills at Gillette. Things don't go very well for them there. Lossman outthrows Tom Brady 164 yards to 163, but the Patriots win 19-17.
Even though Dante Whitner had a big interception in that game, and I remember the general feeling, not necessarily among the media, but among the fans then was, I think we might have something here. New England was in the midst of their dominance, playing them tight, making plays on them on the road, gave legitimate. I think people were more optimistic about the Bills at 0-1 than they were at 0-0 coming out of that game, having made so many plays on defense.
Week 2. Malarkey comes back in our lives once again, this time as a coordinator with Nick Saban and the Miami Dolphins. What was the lead-up like for Malarkey's first game against his old team in Week 2?
Everybody shut it down, right, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
it was. I remember a lot of the talk radio, I think, at that time was in Buffalo was that Malarkey basically abandoned the team.
Yeah.
They felt betrayed by him, and the fans were really bitter about that. I mean, that's the sentiment I really remembering from when Malarkey left.
But the locker room was kind of dead to it.
Yeah, very much so.
Bills defense was terrific in that game. They sacked Dante Culpepper 7 times. Ryan Denny alone had 3 of them. Bills go on to win 16-6. They're 1-1. Week 3, the Bills host the New York Jets in their home opener. McGahee runs for 150 yards, but Lossman a touchdown, an interception, and 2 fumbles lost, which just seems like the quintessential J.P. Lossman line. A touchdown,
it's a hat trick.
Yeah,
it's a Lossman hat trick.
I was going to say, 2 fumbles forced by Kerry Rhodes.
Took a fumble.
Wow. 1 return for a touchdown. Thad, Jets win 28-20. Now, okay, Lossman he is what he is.
Yeah. The going back through that tape, the thing that struck me was, I didn't watch every second everything we shot, but it seemed like I'd scroll, stop. Every time I'd stop, Lossman would be getting sacked. He never figured out how to get rid of the ball, and that was his Achilles heel. He would just hold it and hold it and hold it. Occasionally, you'll see, if you stop it 5 times, you'll see 4 sacks. The 5th play will be him throwing a 70-yard touchdown because he scrambled for 15 seconds, and the defensive backs are all exhausted lying on the ground.
Well, we talked about before where Bledsoe had the thing where he'd get back and his clock would start going. You could tell because he'd start patting the ball. He'd start taking and okay, he's either got to get rid of this thing or he's going down. Lossman never had that.
Yeah.
Lossman was just, and he never, I don't think he had an internal clock at all.
Week 4, the Bills take on the Minnesota Vikings. J.P. Lossman throws for 224 yards, a touchdown to Peerless Price. Bills win that game 17-12 to go to 2-2. But the 3-week stretch that comes after this game really sets the table for the rest of the 2006 season. Week 5 in Chicago. Now, the Bears go to the Super Bowl that year, so, it's a very good Bears team. But the Bills lose 40-7. Week 6 at Detroit. John Kitna picks apart the Buffalo Bills. That's not a good sign.
No, never.
They were on 5, yeah.
Lions, the Bills lose to an undefeated team, then lose to a winless team the following week. Lions win 20-17. Then week 7, right before the bye, at home against New England. Brady throws 2 touchdowns. Corey Dillon runs for 2 touchdowns. Lossman, a pick, 2 sacks, 2 fumbles lost. Patriots win 28-6. The Bills have lost 3 straight to go into the bye at 2-5. And, that was kind of where you felt 06 ended for you guys, or at least in terms of any real shots of the playoffs?
The Bears one was the biggest one for me. I remember thinking coming out of that game, wow, they are not good. And any of the small glimmers of hope for the first few weeks had kind of been taken away.
It really, you get a game like that at that point of the season where, obviously a big test for him, but to fail that miserably, you're just like, oh man, here we go again.
In his last 3 starts, J.P. Losman has thrown for 3 touchdowns. He has thrown 5 interceptions and had 3 fumbles lost going into the bye week. I know a year before, Malarkey cut bait on Losman after 4 games and went to Kelly Holcomb. Was there any discussion of switching to Holcomb, or was it just kind of felt like it's a lose-lose situation? I mean, you're going from one bad quarterback to another.
We saw that picture the year before. We knew what the ending was going to be. I mean, I think at that point, too, there was more of a feeling of, especially with a new coach, let's give Losman more leash to see if there's going to be any return on this first-round investment.
Aaron Schobel has one of the better games of his career coming out of the bye in Week 9 at home against the Green Bay Packers. Schobel sacks Brett Favre twice, has a fumble recovery, 4 QB hits, 4 tackles. The Bills don't turn the ball over. Yeah. Success, no turnovers. The Bills win 24-10. They've had wins coming out of byes before, but you knew what this team was, even at 3-5. That this team wasn't going to go very far.
Schobel is always an interesting story.
I want to get your. Yeah. We haven't really talked about him a whole lot, and this is probably his best season. He has 14 sacks in 2006. Just your interactions with Schobel, what was he like? I know he wasn't Spikes, he wasn't Fletcher, but a productive guy on his day.
If Sabres GM Tim Murray was a football player, it would be semi-close to Aaron Schobel.
That's the weirdest comparison I've ever heard.
He was gruff. He was not willing to speak his mind too often. He was really kind of a worthless interview for the most part.
He was kind of, I think,
not a bad guy.
No, he was an aw shucks guy.
Yeah.
He was just kind of like, he just didn't
was
really.
Just a dude.
He was a dude. He was just kind of there, and not in a negative way, but it was I don't think he was comfortable. Never got comfortable speaking to the media.
And which is weird because he was the premier, if there was such a thing, defensive lineman for that team. Yep. Alongside Kyle Williams for a long, long time. Yeah. He had a very solid career, but even if he had played, we talked about Eric Moulds, New York, Dallas would have been different. Aaron Schobel would have been the same guy in any market. He would have been, okay, he's got a few sacks, but he's not a star, and he's not anybody you're ever going to talk about.
In a way, kind of like Phil Hansen was.
Well, no, Hansen had way more charisma.
A lot more personality, but as far as like performance-wise, I think.
Same level.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I think it's a great comparison because strip away the personalities, they're probably the same guy.
Yeah.
But when you insert Hansen with his ability to be a guy who would stand up, take charge, be a leader, Schobel was never that.
Right.
And you look back now, if I just said Phil Hansen, Aaron Schobel, you're going to put Hansen a solid level above Schobel. They were probably pretty close. To be honest, Schobel,
football player.
Yeah, Schobel probably had a little more ability. To be perfectly honest.
Well, there you go. I didn't cover either of these guys, so I have no real text to just go, oh, okay, that's good. Week 10, the Bills travel to Indianapolis. Ryan Lindell kicks 3 field goals. Peyton Manning he's just better. Mm-hmm. the Bills dropped that one 17-16, but November 19th, Week 11 in Houston. Lee Evans. Just go. Talk about that one.
The 283-yard catch game was just one of the weirdest games.
In the first quarter.
First 7 minutes of the first quarter. And, you spent a half of that game wondering, how did they possibly score 2 touchdowns from the same exact yard line way over there, And they dominated the first part of that game. And then, as the Bills were wont to do in that era, the offense fell asleep for 35 minutes at a time. And then JP, and I had to watch it again to remember. I don't think either one of us, somebody else, a different pool station had it. The touchdown pass that JP throws with 9 seconds to go to Price to win the game is an elite throw, a Tom Brady level throw, inarguably. And to look at that and think, how, even in that game, you did this with Lee Evans, you did Jack, and then you throw this high level, and even on the drive. If you read the drive summary, remember this. The drive wasn't anything. It was dump to the running back, dump to the running back, dump to the running back, Josh Reed, and then, whoa, what is this to win the game? So And that was J.P. Lossman. Brief flashes of brilliance in between utter long slogs of just terribleness.
Slogs.
We talked about it.
It felt like.
In
How many
2005.
games did you sit in that office and watch J.P. Lossman down? I mean, all the time, knowing this is going nowhere.
2005, we looked at that schedule, and the win on Christmas Eve against Cincinnati when they were 13-2 or whatever they were, it was like that one you look at and you're like, that one makes no sense. This one makes no sense. I know the Texans were nothing special, but Lee Evans has 265 receiving yards, which is still a Bills franchise record to this day. J.P. Lossman has a career-high 340 yards. The Bills have to then pull out a win out of a magic hat with 9 seconds left. The Bills win 24-21. This game makes zero sense looking back at it 11 years later.
All those numbers are inflated by the fact that they caught the Texans napping on 2 long passes. Really.
Even if you take 160 yards out, it's still a very impressive day.
Well, that's really more of a comment on J.P. Lossman than
Yeah,
anything
I
else,
guess.
But that was a good day for him. And that's really what it was. The numbers were eye-popping because of the weirdness of the first 2 touchdowns. It's football. It's 16 games a year. There's always one that, that was the one for the Bills. So
he actually scratched his head.
just in case, for all the listeners, yes.
Week 12, the Bills at home against Jacksonville right after Thanksgiving. J.P. Lossman has another game-winning drive. This one leads into field goal territory. The Lindell kicks a 42-yarder as time expires. The Bills are 5-6. So after a 2-5 start, here they are kind of playing well, but it wasn't like 04. At least from looking back on it.
You were sitting there thinking, okay, it was just, they were
The
so
offense
blah.
stinks.
Yes.
It
was just brutal.
Yeah. This was the beginning of, well, they're 5-6. At least we can talk about them now.
Yeah, right.
That was the
It's
first
going
of those.
to Orchard Park on a Wednesday in December worth it.
Yeah.
Week 13, the Bills host the San Diego Chargers. This one doesn't go as poorly as the one the year before when it was 35-0 at halftime or whatever it was, but the Chargers still win this game, 24-21. Week 14, here is that Jets game down in the Meadowlands. Willis McGahee has a 57-yard touchdown run. Lee Evans has a 77-yard touchdown reception. Those 2 things don't make any sense. Yeah. Clemens has a 58-yard pick 6 in this game. This is a very strange 2006 season because 05 was so bad. 06 is not, I don't know that it's good, but there are these moments, these flashes that defy logic. And what was that like covering it and watching it week in, week out?
That one I actually shot. And the one thing I remember about that, you talk about wanting to show off to everybody, the Lee Evans touchdown catch, I'm on the wrong end of the field. I'm watching his back as he runs away from me. Because the Jets were up 10-7. The Jets were going to the playoffs that year. And, my feeling was, well, the Jets are just going to do whatever they want to the Bills. And it did not happen that way. I think that was just the Bills had players who could make plays on occasion, especially with Lee Evans and McGahee. That's another thing about watching the video from that year. You remember that Willis McGahee was an elite back at that point, when healthy.
Some of the cuts he made were just obscene.
And the way he would cut, bounce the outside, and then get the corner so consistently, you don't remember how good he was because A, there was baggage, and B, there was
injuries. It did not end well either.
Yeah, exactly. So, but watching those highlights, you're like, wow, this guy could really play. And Evans was good too, and proved that in Houston and later on throughout his career, he could beat anybody deep.
Bills are 1 win away from getting to 500, which is kind of amazing considering the start of the season that they had. Week 15, they host the Miami Dolphins. This game's blacked out, and it is the first Bills-Dolphins blackout in Western New York since 1987. Clearly, the fans are not investing in this team. Was there any feeling that the talk of the future of this team and it being located in Western New York, do you think that played at all into people not going? Because there's been no talk of blackout since the Pagulas purchased the team, even though they haven't had great seasons. They've had seasons that have kept hope alive. They were in the hunt going into December. But I even remember covering the last few years of Ralph Wilson's tenure as Bills owner. And, the blackout conversation was there every week, especially late in the year. At this time, now we're really seeing it where they're getting 2-3 consecutive home games blacked out. What was that like at this time where this conversation is really coming up every week?
It was frustrating. I think it was.
Especially as a CBS station.
Yeah, it really was because but at the same time, you're like, why, we don't want to see it.
Yeah. It wasn't, I don't think it was a relocation thing. I think it was just it's cold in December and they're not good.
Yeah.
And we know they're not good, even though their record is whatever and whatever.
And I think the luster of that rivalry had it diminished so much.
Both teams are bad at this time.
Both teams are bad. and it just wasn't there anymore. They were never battling for, they didn't have a game that meant anything for how long, you know?
I was about to say, when we talked about the first Dolphins game, that really kind of felt like the first year where you still asked the questions, but you didn't really believe in them anymore.
No.
This game is significant for one little piece of trivia that I discovered. Bills win this game 21-0. The head coach of the Miami Dolphins at this time is Nick Saban. This is the last time that a team coached by Nick Saban is shut out.
Wow.
After this season ends, Nick Saban says 4 days after this game, I am not going to be the Alabama coach. Then 3 weeks later, he becomes the head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide. And I guess there really isn't any thought because you didn't know it at the time, but looking at Nick Saban, knowing the success he had at LSU, and then knowing as you're looking at him on the field that, like, this guy is going to become the greatest football coach in college football history is so strange to me.
Yeah. He was a joke at that point.
He was not a good NFL head coach.
No, not only that, he was a joke. Yeah. I mean, people did not take him seriously. They respected the record at LSU, but everybody wondered if he could get the job done in the NFL. And by then, the verdict had been in that he could not do it.
Yeah. It's probably the last time he's going to get shut out, too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing.
He may never get it.
There's the answer to a trivia question. The last team to shut out a Nick Saban coach team, the Buffalo Bills.
It's true now. It will be true forever.
Yeah.
Roll Tide. Week 16, the Bills host the Tennessee Titans. The Bills are 7-7. They have made it to the top of Mount 500, and playoff hopes are actually alive. 9-7 in the AFC, got to the playoffs. Kansas City was 9-7. They went to the postseason that year. Did you actually think they were going to make the playoffs?
That week, I remember, was the one week where I think we kind of took it, I don't know about but the feeling was still kind of serious.
Yeah.
And that game was fun because that was the crazy Vince Young game where he, remember at the end of the half, he runs like a 40-yard touchdown, and then the Bills get like a penalty on a Hail Mary and kick a field goal.
Yes.
So that whole game was just like up and down. Like, we talked about slogs and terrible offense. That game was loads of fun and unexpected fun for a whole bunch of different reasons, even though the Bills ended up losing. It was a different game for that year and really was a whole lot of fun to watch. It was Christmas weekend.
It was Christmas Eve. This game was on December 24th.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, Bills had won 5 of 7 going into that game. Game also memorable. Travis Henry makes his triumphant return. And we've kind of poked fun at Travis over these last few episodes. He wasn't the brightest bulb out there. You want to pull for a guy like that, and okay, he's not. Come on, he's a guy. Everyone makes mistakes. He misses the team flight to come to Buffalo, and he goes, Travis, you know what time you have to make the plane. Make the plane. Yeah. Don't make it so easy for people to lay in you. But Travis Henry, to his credit, has a great game. Runs for 135 yards, outduels Willis McGahee. The Titans go on to win 30-29, and the Titans, I believe, were on a streak of like 8 straight wins at that point, too.
Yeah. Didn't they? I think they started like 0-6 and then like 8-8, something like that.
And they missed the playoffs because they lost to New England the following week. I looked that up. But, it's just what.
Yes. Now, that clicks all the bells in now. Because I remember no one took them seriously, and all of a sudden they started beating everybody.
Vince Young is winning games left and right.
His only good stint in the NFL there. Yeah.
Former Buffalo Bills quarterback, Vince Young. And then the final week of the season, the Bills travel to Baltimore in Week 17. The Bills are officially eliminated with that loss to the Titans in Week 16. So the Bills wrap up 2006, 7-9. Final thoughts on a season that really had a stretch in the beginning that was poor and set the table for the whole year.
Do you think this was kind of when we started talking drought? Maybe looking at it
that way? It started sinking a little bit. I think it's funny that like that mark of 7-9 is so perfect for this team. Mm-hmm. Just
with moments. With moments. 7 wins, but no losses. It just doesn't say anything.
Yeah,
about
it really
anything.
doesn't.
Yeah, it gives you no. I mean, we knew about J.P. Lawson at that point, but it just pointed you in no direction.
Yeah.
And except for where we've already been. And I wish I could like pick a spot where you could say this is definitely what it was. But I think for sure it was during the Jauron era. That's where it started. Because before him it was Donahoe, it was Hope, Coach A, Coach B. When Donahoe left and Jauron came in, I don't know whether it probably wasn't year one, but before Chan Gailey came in, when Chan Gailey came in after Jauron, in there is when the drought really began to be felt in Western New York. And I'd probably argue between the end of 2006 and somewhere in the middle of 2007, that's probably the moment it really started.
Even after 05 when they went 5-11? Because for me, that's when I think the drought starts. But I didn't cover. I was an NFL fan. I remember these years, but I didn't. I wasn't in the locker room week in, week out. To me, I look back at it, from a distance, and I say, 2005, 5-11, JP Lossman stinks. Here's where the drought starts. But you guys feel different.
2005 was the end of one bad GM. Mm-hmm. When it's Jauron and Levy and eventually Brandon, then it becomes a pattern. Now it's just not one. It's not just Tom Donahoe's bad choices or Greg Williams' bad choices. Now it's a pattern of bad management and bad choices. And that's, during the Jauron era is certainly when it started.
Bill sent 2 guys to the Pro Bowl in the 2007 Pro Bowl. It is Aaron Schobel and Brian Moorman, the punter. We haven't talked about Moorman yet, though he has now gone to back-to-back Pro Bowls. Even in the media myself, I could probably count on one hand the number of times I've interviewed Colton Schmidt or Brian Moorman or any punter for the Buffalo Bills. Your thoughts on the best player on this team might be the guy that gives the ball to the other team.
Was this the Sean Taylor year, by the way? The Sean Taylor Pro Bowl?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. So if you want to talk, since we're talking about Moorman, just your thoughts about Moorman, and then, of course, in that 07 Pro Bowl when he gets lit up by Sean Taylor.
Well, the joke for all of us in the media was you'd go out and cover practice, and it was on a grass field, and you'd only be able to cover the first 20, 25 minutes. And then they would march you back to the media room to wait for the practice to end so you could do interviews. Well, inside the field house, which was between the practice field and the media room, was where the kickers and punters worked out. And almost every week, I remember we'd walk by, and we'd be just filing back our own thoughts. You'd walk by more, and we'd say to each other, there's the best guy on the team. And it was a joke, but it wasn't a joke.
Not at all.
Because Brian Moorman, year in and year out, was one of the best Buffalo Bills during the Drought era, if not the best.
I would say so. Most consistent, easily, by far. His performance, he was a great kicker.
And a great guy to deal with, too. Yeah.
Most special teams guys are. Not all.
Kickers can be a little frosty.
Yeah.
A little goaltenderish.
Yeah, exactly.
They can be a little, if you catch them on a bad day, they get.
And not only is Brian Moorman a good guy to deal with, but he was, especially for his size, one of the most multifunctional punters the Bills had.
So as we put a bow on 2006, this is the last episode for Mr. Dave Yates.
Yes.
Dave, you took your talents to East Ridge High School shortly at the start of the 2007 season. So Dave, just final thoughts on 7 years of the drought that you experienced coming off such a successful run in the 1990s.
I grew up a Bills fan, so I loved being able to cover the team, and being able to see some of the moments that happened, even during the bad times, it was great to be a part of. And the friends that I made doing it, and the memories I had from that was the most special thing for me. The team stuff aside, even the playing Yahtzee on media day up.
We haven't even talked about
we haven't talked about Yahtzee.
We used to have Yahtzee tournaments while we waited for the interviews to start. There was that big lull, and everybody had a handheld Yahtzee game, and it was before cell phones, the smartphones and everything. So that was how we kill our time.
We'll do 60 seconds. We didn't just have a tournament. It was mostly my fault. We went nuts. We had 9 people, okay? Every week, we would play a round robin to organize seedings. Then the 8 versus 9 would play, and then you'd have tournament-style knockout round all the way to a champion. And then at the end of the year, we had a grand champion, which was won. We only did this 2 years. It was won by Paul Hamilton, who works in radio in Buffalo right now. We had a Yahtzee Cup trophy, which was just a styrofoam coffee cup, but we wrote his name on it and everything. And I used to keep stats.
He kept stats.
Wow.
So I could tell you.
I don't know what that says about you, but it says something.
I could tell you what everyone's average score was in the round robin and in the tournament. I could tell you who had the most Yahtzees, who had the most Yahtzees per game. At this point, I was single with no kids, so I needed something to do. But yeah, we now. I took it to a new level of seriousness. But everybody else in the tournament, the same 9 people were there every week.
Who were the 9? If
it was
remember?
All right. It was well. The funny thing is that we had nicknames. I think we didn't want to admit that we were involved. So I was Young Buck. Dave was Yizzy, right?
Yizzy.
That was Ward Fasold, who worked at Channel 2 in Buffalo, who came up with these names. One of the more brilliant, funny guys we've ever known. He was the wizard. So he was in Paul Peck, Paul Hamilton, Russ, who still did radio in Buffalo. Another Russ who did Time Warner. I haven't talked to him in a long time. Who am I missing? 2 other people. Not that important. But the only one who still covers the team is the only one who covers the team is probably me. Right. Paul Hamilton's there occasionally.
Yeah, he comes and goes. Yeah, he's more Sabres.
Yeah, but so every week it was like clockwork. And this was only 01, 02, 03, somewhere in there. You cover practice, you eat lunch, we play Yahtzee for like an hour and a half, and then we do interviews.
Oh my God. Dave, seeing Thad Brown going and playing Yahtzee, Thad, what are you doing? Is that what, what?
No, I was in there too.
Yeah. Well,
I led the league in throwing Yahtzee games, I think. If I lost. We took him on the road with us.
Oh, yeah.
Looking back at the video and going over these years, Dave, is there anything that stood out to you? Any memories that came back? Anything that went like, I can't believe I did that, or anything like that?
Well, I think Thad touched upon it too a little bit, where as bad as the teams were, some of the talent that was on those teams was just a pleasure to watch. And some of the guys that you interacted with, really, it's still, as a sports fan, it's neat to be a part of. That's why we do this, or why I did it. It's just neat to be a part of it and to be there and to do the type of things that all the people sitting in the stands would just love to be able to get a chance to do. When you walk on that field the first time and you just look around and see, it's something that you just don't forget. I mean, the NFL is just it's as close to gladiators as we're gonna get.
How many years were you at 8?
10. I think it was.
Don't ask me. I don't remember.
Close.
Yeah, you would know.
Something like that. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So, I mean, you were there for playoff games.
Yep.
You were there for the 3-13 seasons. Was there one particular guy or a group of guys that that was the guy I always wanted to talk to? That guy maybe has more to himself than is just a football player. This guy seems like a favorite guy, maybe even.
I liked Marcellus Wiley a lot. Marcellus was
Columbia educated, of course.
Just a great guy to go to, a great player, and a fantastic guy to talk to. Was always willing to talk, and he got it. He was really, really, really good at it. He handled it well. Moulds I liked a lot, and the majority of the tight ends that you ever dealt with were always
fullbacks. Yeah.
Tight ends and fullbacks. Yeah.
But saying that he got it was the best way to talk about Marcellus Wiley.
Yeah.
Dave Yates. Yeah, he's got it too. We'll bid him adieu, but there's a whole lot more to talk about. We still have 10 more years left before we put a bow on this. Yeah, there's a lot of Bills football coming up. But to the next episode for 2007, the next episode of Down and Drought.